हरि ओम। वक्रतुंड महाकाय सूर्यकोटि समप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गुरु ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुदेवो महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Team Param Vedanta warmly welcomes you to the third and final summary session of Panchadashi, the transformational Vedantic text authored by the great warrior saint Swami Vidyaranya. We began these classes in the month of June, picking up selected verses from this chapter. After an intensive workout on those selected verses, we are now reaching the completion of our study and are in our final summary session. This has been a systemic study of Panchadashi through the 7 steps from Ajnana to Tripti. The one shloka from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad we have repeatedly discussed, which has been the central theme of this study to take us through these 7 stages. That is, Atmanam ched vijaniyat ayam asmiti purushaha kimichan kasya kamaya shariram anusanjvaret. Last week, Dr. Hegde sir, Dr. Anupama ma'am, and Srimati Pannaga summarized the second set of verses from 71 to 134 of the chapter, covering the second pada of above shloka, that is, Ayam Asmiti Purushaha. In today's class, Dr. Hegde sir will summarize the third and final bunch of verses from 135 to 297 of Tripti Deepa. These verses will cover the second line of above shloka, that is, Kimichan Kasya Kamaya Shariram Anusanjvaret. He will be assisted by Dr. Anupama ma'am, Dr. Ravi Shankar, and Dr. Dibakar. Dr. Hegde sir, please.
Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. A deep sense of gratefulness as we come to the end of our Tripti Deepa classes, and gratefulness to our gurus and to all my fellow seekers from Param Vedanta for making a combined effort to study and to make this presentation online, which I think is a very valuable source of study. Namah Shri Shankarananda Guru Padambu Janmane Savilasa Mahamoha Graha Graseka Karmani. In the last 2 classes, we had done a summary of the first line, Atmanam Che Vijaniya Ayam Asmiti Purusha, in 2 classes. Today we come to the Palashruti part. That means that's the second line. For those who have understood this Mahavakya very clearly, and those who have internalized this learning in their lives. That means, if I have understood what this Mahavakya, I am Asmi iti Purusha, that means I am Atma Brahma. If this knowledge is very clear to somebody, such a person is called a jnani. That means he's got spiritual wisdom. What kind of desires will such a person have? Kim Ichan. That will be studied. That will be a long section. Kasya Kamaya. Who is there in him to desire? What suffering will be there? Which means, in a sense, there will be no suffering. And if there is no suffering, then there is Purnatvam. The first part is a very long part, which goes from verses 135 to 190. Essentially saying, now a person who has understood this, what desire will such a person have? Now, the answer will be, even though the person does not have ignorance, the person will still have desires based on one's prarabdha, which is going to be explained. And Vidyaranya gives a unique form of a classification of prarabdha, which we have not heard before. The whole theme of the entire class today is about overcoming suffering. When Gautama Buddha became enlightened, his whole quest for enlightenment was to find meaning for suffering. And his first declaration in his first talk, he said that this world is full of suffering. The root cause of suffering is desire. The way to overcome suffering is to overcome desire. And that is exactly what we will see. Perhaps nowhere is desire analyzed so beautifully as in the Kim Ichan part. Now, Gautama Buddha says this, that desire is because a person is not able to accept the reality of the present moment. He calls it true suchness. And he asks us to be able to accept this true suchness. Whenever there is a mental resistance to whatever is, then a person is not happy, the person is suffering. I would like to change the situation around. And the suffering is due to persons, objects, or situations. We now know, and we've been students of Vedanta, we know that this world, whenever we desire any objects of the world, they have three doshas. Anything that you wish, that you want in this world, what is called Vishayananda, it is dukkha mishrita. That means there is a pain in the acquisition. It is bandha tattvam. It creates a bondage, and whatever you get does not give total fulfillment. It is atripti karatvam. The whole search for Vedanta is to find a goal that is free from all these three defects. Vedanta gives us one eye-opener, that whatever you see and experience is mithya, or is of a lower order of reality compared to you, the Satya. We have also seen in the Bhagavad Gita the nice verse which says, Ajnanena avritam jnanam pena muhyanti jantavaha. Let us look at how the Vedanta looks at suffering. The Vedanta says all of us are suffering for one reason. We do not know our true nature. Jnanam, spiritual wisdom, or the real knowledge in us is avritam, is covered by ignorance, and therefore we are suffering. Now, because of this, we have what is called avidya, or a fundamental basic ignorance. And because of this ignorance, a thought arises in my mind. If I acquire that object or that person or that kind of a situation, so when that thought arises, that is called kama. And what forces you do something, that is called karma. So an ajnani, a person who does not know that he is purnamada, purnamidam, gets all these karma. But what happens to the reality? The reality is something different. And this is what a jnani knows. That means once you know Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat, I am Asmiti Purushaha, that I am the only source of permanent peace, security, and happiness. That means I am of the nature of infinite Ananda, which is of the nature of Satchit Ananda. This part will be very nicely addressed by a Purva Pakshi question. A Purva Pakshi question now looks at the desire of a jnani who has understood the first line. He says, when avidya goes away, because we have understood the first line, karma should go, karma should go away. And such a person is a jnani, he's a viveka purusha, he's a jagrati sati. Now, he also knows those three doshas. He also knows everything in this world is of a lower order of reality, and he is of a higher order of reality. How can there be desire for such a person? To answer this, and this will be answered by Dr. Ravi Shankar, we need to know what are these vasanas or samskaras. Essentially, although this will be explained, whenever we do any activity, the mind creates a certain pattern. And if it is done repetitiously, it creates a sort of a shortcut in the mind. It is called like an engram. And therefore, because of that, there is a tendency for us to repeat those activities that we like and avoid those which we don't like. These vasanas finally determine what we do in our lives. Vasanas can be Shubha vasanas or vasanas can be Ashubha vasanas. How do these vasanas affect the karta? How does prarabdha affect the bhokta? All these will be answered to us by Dr. Ravi Shankar. Before I ask him to speak, Swami Vidyaranya Swami gives repeatedly so many examples. And one of the examples he gives is of a person who's very hungry but who's served a very sumptuous food. He's about to eat that food and he is informed that the food looks very good, but it is highly contaminated and it can cause a lot of suffering for a person who eats it. Now, if a person, however hungry he is, has got this clear information that if he consumes this food, he is in for a lot of suffering, will such a person ever partake of such a food? On the other hand, here is another person who has had a very good meal, and for such a person you offer him a food which is contaminated. Now this is the situation of a jnani who has that spiritual wisdom, atmanam ched vijaniyat ayam asmiti purusha, and yet a jnani does have desires. Dr. Ravi Shankar will address this. Dr. Ravi Shankar, please.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Kim ichcham kasya kamaya shariram manuswam jaret. Kim ichcham. What desire does a jnani have? The Purva Pashchi's question is based on this conventional rule of avidya causing kama and hence causing karma. Prarabdha karma phala dhyada bhoge swishta bhavedyati klishyaneva. This is a word that we have to understand. So a wise man who has a desire for worldly objects knows that it's an illusionary ghost, and he sees it and takes care of it without attachment and without seriousness. For a samsari, apurnatvam is born of a binding desire, which is bandhaka kama. Swami Vidyaranya says, having thousands of non-binding desires is prarabdha janita kama. And klishya here means detachment without being lost in it. The wise go through experiences with an internal detachment. Bhunjanasthanapi buddha shraddhavanta kutumbinaha. So this attachment with awareness, the prarabdha karma makes a family life possible. The jnani experiences all the pleasures and pains, but the jnani is neither for it nor is he against it. Bhranti jnana nindato is the essence of the verse 145. Klishyan, the suffering he suffers, is not the suffering of samsari dukkha. He is aware of this bhranti jnana and he's aware of it very clearly. It is this attitude of detachment and vairagya where the mind is prepared to lose the losable. That is the essence of the mind of a jnani. Vivekena pariklishyana alpa bhogena triptyati. So this jnani who has the sense pleasure, he is a detached jnani. He has got viveka and vairagya. His heart is full. And so even the smallest sense pleasure gives him not the Vishaya Ananda, but the Atma Ananda. Limited bhoga, and he is overjoyed. This is unlike a sadhaka who has dosha darshana of the anatma prapancha. All of us have these three shaktis, ichha, jnana, and kriya. Now the jnani has desired moksha, and this desire is conditioned by swabhava. For a samsari, ajnana plus apurnatvam gives and makes him addicted. He has got an addiction. But for a jnani, the bimba ananda itself is available as pratibimba ananda. We move on to see na jatu kamaha kamanapu upabhogena samyati havisha krishnatvartmeva. As we have desires and we try to fulfill them, desires can never be removed. In fact, they come up again and again. This is exactly like a fire in the forest, which burns everything and makes it a black krishnatmeva. And this free will is completely gone when we try to fulfill our desires. In this verse, we notice these two phrases, parijnana and vijnana. The understanding is kama for a jnani is ichha shakti alankara. And for a samsari, kama is true samsara. This king who has seen the thieves in his jail picks up one of them who has understanding and discrimination and makes him a spy. Exactly the same way, experience of that enjoyment with understanding and discrimination leads to satisfaction very quickly without further desire. Manaso nigrastasya lila bhogo alpapiyaha. Again, the word klista. The wise, mature, disciplined mind who has a nigraha manasa like a jnani's mind, alpa bhoga lilaha, and they do not have any pain. Klista should not be taken as pain. Lord Rama, as a prince, when he was supposed to be crowned, he was as peaceful as ever, not overjoyed. And when he was asked to go away to the forest, he was consoling everybody. He was not depressed either. Exactly the same way, there is this mind which has got nigraha, and that is the jnani's mind. Viveka jagrati sati dosha darshana lakshane. The Purva Pakshi says, the question is based on avidya kama karma. Now, jnani has atma anatma viveka, and this viveka is always alive and active in his mind. So he sees those three doshas of samsara, bandhakratva, atriptikaratva, and dukkha mishratva with viveka. Then the question is, how is this prarabdha karma possible as a bhoga ichha? The world is mixed with poison. How can it be bhoga ichha? In this next slide, we understand, and Swami Vidyaranya beautifully explains and classifies Ichha, Anichha, Parecha, Sa Prarabdham, Trividham Smritam. These are the three types of Prarabdha. Ichha Prarabdha is Ichha Dwara Bhoga Pradana Prarabdham. Anichha Prarabdha is Jnani's Karta, is not at all influenced, he does not have a personal desire. And Anecha Prarabdha or Parecha Prarabdha, neither the Jnani's Ichha nor somebody else's Ichha. So the Purva Pakshi says, how can a Jnani have a desire without having a cause of desire? And these desires have to be because of avidya. For a Jnani, avidya is absent, dosha darshana is present. No defect is there in accepting a desire for a Jnani, says Swami Vidyaranya, and says that this is only because of his prarabdha. So the consequences of prarabdha are karma phala and karma vasana. Karma phala gives rise to future bhokta, and karma vasana affects the future karta. This is further explained in the next slide. As prarabdha itself can give rise to prarabdha phala and prarabdha vasana. This prarabdha vasana influences the kartatvam in the jnani. Now, we can very clearly understand this as jnani being a bhokta and a karta at a lower level of vyavaharika order. But by the paramarthika drishti, they are completely falsified. Therefore, a vyavaharika drishti jnani has vyavaharika kartatva and vyavaharika bhokta, but they are completely influenced by prarabdha vasana. In these three verses, the questions are to do or not to do. It is will versus vasana. And the understanding should be very clear. Ichha prarabdha, the jnani desires activities only because of prarabdha vasana as explained. If this ichha prarabdha vasana is prabala, extremely strong, the willpower is not able to restrain that vasana as explained in the Gita verse chapter 3:13. Swabhava will not produce a karma directly. How does it do it? It is because of ragadvesha. It is the ragadvesha which forces a person to act. And the viveki, a man, a jnani, whose mind is very clear of viveka, he nips this ragadvesha in its bud. The healthy ragadveshas can continue. In the next slide, we understand that when this vasana is very powerful, the human being succumbs to the prarabdha experiences. When the prarabdha is powerful, even the jnani will have to surrender to this prarabdha anubhava. Paramarthananda Swamiji very clearly explains, Ishwarena api varayitum na shakyate. When prarabdha vasana is so powerful, none can stop that ichha and that pravrti, not even Ishwara. But Bhagwan is omnipotent, omnipresent. Will he not change it? He will not change the law of karma and vasana created by Ishwara is the answer. Now we come to the topic of aniccha prarabdha. Your own prarabdha, the free will, tells something, but the karta does something else. The vasanas are responsible for your sin. This is explained in the Bhagavad Gita, verse 336. Atha kena prayukto yam papam charati purushaha anichanapi varshneya baladhiva niyojitaha. In the next slide, we notice all this is because of Kama esha krodha esha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahasano mahapatma vidhye namiha vairinam. It is only because of Kama Krodha born out of Rajoguna, says Paramatma. Prarabdha Vasana alone is responsible for this. So Bhagwan is only a Samanya Karana, but our Prarabdha is the Vishesha Karana, which is our internal enemy. We move on to understand that Kartum nechasi yan mano karishyasvapopi tata na ichhasi yat mohat karishyasi. Always make your free will align with your prarabdha vasana. If there is a difference, we want to do something, but we end up doing something else. So Lord Krishna says your profession should be governed by the combination of your will, your vasana, and your dharma. Loka sangraha karma is the parecha karma of a jnani. And if a jnani gets honored while he does the loka sangraha karma, it is a parecha prarabdha. It has nothing to do with him by himself. Katham tarhi kimichha nityamevichha nishidhyate. Bharjita bijatvat is an essential, important thing that we should understand. When there is ichha prarabdha, kim ichham kasya kamaya, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad Vakya very clearly negates a desire for a jnani. We have seen the Bhagavad Gita verses. Swami Vidyaranya says, jnani's desires are caused by prarabdha vasana. Katham ichham nishidhyate. Jnani and desire, between the two is a moral, legitimate, non-binding desire. So the Shruti falsifies these desires, and these desires are made mithya. They are non-binding. Mundaka Upanishad says, Kamanya kamayate manyamana sa kama jayate tatra tatra jayate. These desires are responsible for next janma. How do you explain this? And we understand it very clearly in this verse, which says, the roasted seed exists, but they don't germinate. The wise man's desires exist, but they do not have any dependency. While we know that kama perpetuates samsara cycle, vidya bharjita ichha, that seed, that ichha, which has been roasted by jnanam, is like a roasted seed in the case of a jnani. This ichha badha is complete falsification of that ichha, and therefore it is an extremely subtle psychological difference between a jnani and an ajnani. While the wise man applies oil to take away the jackfruit without getting it sticky, an ajnani has to play on a sticky wicket. This is understood as vyasana. Shri Guru Bhyo Namah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Shankar, for making a wonderful summary of the verses 135 to 190, quoting all the relevant verses, answering the Purva Pakshi's questions. How does the jnani have a desire? Because he knows the defects about the desire itself. He knows he's of a higher order of reality. He knows that this whole world is mithya. He's purna. And then we had that nice classification of the prarabdha, ichha, aniccha, parecha. And we also have an understanding how vasanas affect the karta and how prarabdha affects the bhokta. Essentially, if we look at this section, which is called the Kim Itchen section, I have a question for you. This whole section, is it overcoming likes and dislikes? Is it negating the world of desires? Or is it negating the desirer, one in yourself? I'll repeat the question. You don't have to answer it aloud, but you mentally, having understood the whole Kim Itchen section of so many verses, this is a very powerful method or powerful set of Sanskrit verses to help us. Is it to overcome likes and dislikes? Is it to overcome the whole world of desires? Or is it to negate the one in us who has the desire? And the answer is this. It is Bhoga Prapancha Nisheda, to negate the world of desires. That means a jnani can be in this world full of desires, but now is not affected. We go to the next topic. And the next topic is called Kasya Kamaya. That means for whom? Who is the one who has the desire? Although all these are like questions, these are very assertive statements. As you will see, although we say Kim Ichan or Kasya Kamaya, all these three things are assertive statements, difficult to believe, but this is there is no enjoyer or there is no sufferer in ourselves, that there is no bhokta. And the whole of verses 192 to 222 is an analysis to tell us that there is nobody inside me who is the enjoyer or who is the sufferer. Now you can say this is ridiculous because I am suffering. And how do you ever say that there is nobody there inside you who suffers? Now, what is the purpose of Vedanta? Let us see, just like Gautama Buddha went in search of a solution to all human problems, Vedanta is to find answers to human problems. And what is the greatest human problem? The greatest human problem is human suffering. All of us are suffering. And when you go through difficulty, at that moment, your suffering is real. What is Vedanta's approach is to solve this problem by dissolving the one who has the problem. This is a wonderful analysis. You cannot do this when you are going through intense suffering, because at that time, the sufferer is real. But when you have used that moment, at a moment when your mind is quiet, to analyze who in me is suffering. This is, see, Bhagwan Ramana has never gone through scriptural studies the way we went. He is a realized being. And as a realized being, he found out one solution to all human problems. Anybody who would come to him and say, Bhagwan, I am suffering, with very patiently he will listen. Okay, who is suffering? He says, I am suffering. Who are you? Can you look into that question and discover who is that sufferer in you? And then he gives a formula. And the formula is Naham Deham. Normally, we identify with this body. Body means body-mind. And Bhagavan says, you are not this body-mind. Then what do? Koham. You have to evaluate. You have to inquire. Just inquiring by yourself will not help you because I have very limited knowledge. I need to go to a person who has understood who he is, who has discovered his true nature, like Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi, and a teacher who's able to communicate. Such a person is called a Shrotriya Brahmanishta, one who's anchored. So such a person usually uses the scriptural knowledge and communicates in a way like Vidyaranya Sukhabodhaya. Sukhabodhaya is in a way that we will be able to understand. To all of you who are listening, this is my promise that Vidyaranya has given us a tool to overcome human suffering by understanding who is the sufferer, just like Bhagwan gives, but in a broken up way. And this section on Kasya Kamaya will help you because the ultimate of Veda is Saha Aham Asmi. Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat Ayam Asmiti Purusha is the meaning of the word Soham. That means I am not an ordinary human being. Stop. That vision is gone. I see myself as I am Atma Brahma. Why is this important? Because as body-mind, And all of us as doctors and other professionals know for one thing for sure, there is no complete solution to any problem. But as you come into the Paramarthika domain, you will see from that perspective of Atma, you will see there is really no problem at all. Different Upanishads give different solutions. This is the solution of the Mundakopanishad by telling us our body can be compared to a tree and there are two birds. The lower bird, which we normally identify ourselves with, the ahankara or the ego, which is part of the body-mind complex. But through Vedanta Vichara, we discover Saha Aham Asmi, or the higher me. And when you discover that higher me, you discover that I am not one, but I am two. There is something of the extraordinary in me. The moment you discover the extraordinary in me, then you realize, and the more you anchor. Now, this transition takes some time. Again, going back to the Bhagavad Gita, Ajnanena avritam jnanam tena muhyanti jantavaha, and therefore I need all the knowledge available to move from my identification from the body-mind complex to the higher complex. I will go back to Gautama Buddha. Gautama Buddha represents all enlightened beings, all jnanis. Whenever a person goes to a Mahatma, and the question is always this, I want happiness. And all Mahatmas tell there's only two things that you need to do. Remove the I, remove the want, then you have happiness. I'll repeat. What does I represent? I represents the ego, the bhokta, kasya kamaya. We are now evaluating who is the one who is suffering. So I have to learn to erase my ego. And unless I learn to erase my ego, by whatever tarike, whatever yena kena prakarena, through Guru, through being a bhakta, through surrender of the Lord. One method is I surrender and accept the will of the Lord. So I cease to exist. So I have to erase my ego. The I has to go. Second is the want has to go. Our solution is Atmaneva Atmanatushtaha. When I discover my higher self, my Purnatvam self, then the want, Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogata, all of them drop by themselves. Then what am I left with? Then I want happiness, I want God, I want peace. Whatever I want, you have to work on two things: removal of the ego and somehow removing the want. And our solution is discovering your true nature, who you already are. Now that is the background. So the karta in me, and clearly demonstrated by Sri Dakshinamurti in a through silence, very eloquently. Whenever you see a symbol of Dakshinamurti, you remember this finger, my ahankara, represents my ego, and that has to surrender. How is the bhokta negated? Be patient, I will help you. Now, a spiritually evolved person is convinced of one thing, that this world is mithya, that means it is of a lower order of reality. I am Satya. As Paramarthika Atma, I am infinite. And therefore, the real me cannot do anything. You will see anything that you do, the moment you do something, that means whenever there is a sense of doership, whenever I do, then you have all the problems. You have to become a bhokta. On the other hand, be a facilitator, allow things to happen. Therefore, how this goes on is kasya kamaya is the understanding that there is no real bhokta. So all along, I have to be in my higher self, where I am the witnessing consciousness. I am the illuminator, but I don't get affected by whatever I illumine. Swami Anubhavananda gives a nice example of a cigarette smoker. A cigarette smoker buys a packet of cigarette, and before he opens it, he can read, cigarette smoking is injurious to health. He illumines this fact. I'm using a negative example. Although you illumine, but is he affected? Not at all. When I get affected, I become the bhokta. See yourself as an illuminator, but one who never gets affected. Now, all these verses from verses 194 onwards, the question is Atma the bhokta? is the reflected consciousness the bhokta, or is the mixture the bhokta? Atma is infinite. It does not undergo any change. And because it does not undergo any change, it is only an illuminator which does not get affected. So Atma can never be the one who enjoys or the one who suffers. The Atma cannot be the bhokta. The next question is Chidabhasa the bhokta, or the reflected consciousness? When the Atma illumines my body-mind, and when the body-mind is illumined, now something comes out, that is the reflected consciousness. Is the reflected consciousness the bhokta? Again, as you know, the reflected consciousness by itself has no existence by itself. It is something mithya and has no... So by itself, the reflected consciousness cannot be the bhokta. The next question is, if it cannot be so, then is it the mixture? So finally, we point out to possibly it is the mixture. That means the reflected consciousness along with the Atma is the bhokta. Now we have come to the discovery that there is the body-mind in me, which is jada or anatma. There is consciousness. When the consciousness reflects on my body-mind, and my body-mind illumines a lot of unpleasant things that are happening, and therefore a new entity is born who is the suffering. Now the Veda initially will accept this as all right. There is a sufferer in me. And then slowly and slowly make an analysis of who am I. We are really, this whole Kasya Kamaya becomes an analysis. The whole journey is from Bhogya, the world of enjoyment, which I work for, to the enjoyer, to the Abhokta. Everyone loves ourselves unconditionally. And then when we dislike a particular object, now that is the whole process here. Now I love somebody who helps me to achieve my goal, but that goal is for myself. And if you look at the gradation, the love for the means is manda, the love for the goal is madhyama, the love for myself is higher. So I love myself more than my goal or the means which I get my goals. This is how these set of verses evaluate. And then we have to understand who is the real me. In me, there are two. There is the lower bird and the higher bird. Now, I have a real passion for myself, but I do not know who this myself was. That love that I have for myself is slowly converted from the ego to the Atma. And that is the whole spiritual journey. And how do we do it? There is something in me that constantly changes. There is something in me that never changes. I often give this example of looking at your own photograph as a little child. That little boy or girl whom you see on that photograph has undergone so much change, but there is something in me that never changes. Vidyaranya Swami uses wonderful examples and quotations, and this is a beautiful quotation from the Kaivalya Upanishad. Jagrat Swapna Shushuptadi Prapancham yad prakashate tad brahma aham iti jnatva. Once I know I am that Brahman who is the illuminator of my waking dream and deep sleep states, sarva bandha pramuchate. That means I am not that limited ego, but I am the Atma, I am the illuminator. So what does this verse say? I am only the perceiver of the pleasures and pains, but I'm not the possessor. I don't claim it as myself. The reflected consciousness is the possessor. The chit, the higher me, is not the possessor. That means if I identify with my lower self, I end in samsara. If I land in my higher self, I illumine whatever is happening, but it will not affect me. Now, when there are two entities, why is it that I should negate the Chidabhasa and not negate the original consciousness or Chit? Now, the enjoyer status is mithya, and it is superimposed, or the reality is borrowed by the original consciousness. So the Vedanta says, when you have to give up two, give up the one that is giving you problems and that which is only temporary. The whole journey now is the discovery of the ahankara, the limited me, and how I am able to give it up. The whole sadhanas is only that. This beautiful verse, Trishu Damasu Yad Bhogyam Bhokta Bhogascha Yad Bhave Tebhyo Vilakshana Sakshi Chinmatroham Sadashivaha. Worth really meditating on, which helps you to repeatedly identify that in the three domains of the experiencer, the experience, the process of enjoyment, there are two things. I need to Tebhyo Vilakshana. I claim myself as the Sakshi Chinmatroham Sadashivaha. Now, this is a change in my mindset. What is that mindset? I have moved from my lower self to my higher self. I am no longer that limited ego or ahankara. This is the spiritual wisdom that comes from the first line, which has been so meticulously worked upon. Atmanam ched vijaniyat yamasmiti purusha. Once that has become a conviction, I know as ego, there is no complete solution to any problem. As Atma, I will see no problem. From now on, I declare that I am no longer a seeker and not a sadhaka. I don't need to do any sadhanas because now I have got whatever spiritual wisdom is there to get. All I need to do is to be able to internalize this wisdom and live the rest of my life as a time pass. Moksha is no longer a goal because I am a mukta purusha. Declare that for yourself. My whole bhakti, whenever I go to a place of worship, is grateful. Trishu Damasu. I'm repeating this beautiful verse once again to say the clear distinction between the Bhokta Chidabhasa and the Abhokta Sakshi. I am that which is, I am clearly distinct. I am the witness. We have numerous other verses. For me, this was a verse I would always quote. Every time I see anything, especially beautiful, Prati Bodha Viditam Matam. Whenever I experience, I come in touch with the experiencer. But after this Kasya Kamaya, is it my ego or my lower self who's experiencing this, or is this my Atma? It should move from the lower bird to the higher bird. So this is the route map of Vedantic Vichara, to move from the Bhoga Vastu to the Bhokta and to discover the Sakshi, to discover from Asatoma to Sadgamaya. And this is possible through practice of Nididhyasanam, to be done again and again. In the whole process, the ego has to be weakened. Before I die, before this body is dropped, I should allow my ego, my body will be laid down by somebody. But before, if my life has to be worthwhile, I have to lay down my ego. My ego should become so weak that it is only for basic functioning only. And such a person will therefore not suffer at all. I have mentioned the story about the great priest of the temple of Jerusalem. He saw greatness in Jesus and he comes very secretly at night because he had of a high stature and Jesus was considered as a vagabond teacher. And he comes to him, I can see some greatness in you. What is that I can do to become like you? And this is a very famously quoted Jesus statement. He says, unless you die as you are, unless the ego is gone, you will not be able to enter into my Father's kingdom. I'll conclude with this beautiful story. I shared it many years ago about a certain business person from Bangalore, traveled to Africa. And once he finished his work, his friend told me, we have an extra day. Can we go to a place where we can see speaking parrots? And the man was amazed to see parrots were actually conversing. And he said, see, back in India, we have never seen such speaking parrots. Is it possible to take one of these birds and take it back home? They managed to catch one, put it in a cage, and he very carefully brought it back to India. And being an African parrot in captivity, he took very good care, gave him the best of nuts, fruits. A year passed and he had a chance to go back to Africa. And he spoke to the speaking parrot and he said, I'm going to meet your friends. Do you have any message for them? So the parrot in the cage tell them, I'm happy in my cage. So he goes back to Africa, and once he finishes whatever he says, his friend now takes him back to the place where he caught that parrot when that the other friends were also there. And he makes an announcement about a year ago. I had taken one of your friends from here. He has a message for you. He wants to tell you that he is happy in his cage. Listening to that, one of the birds fall down dead. And he is shocked and really upset. Why did this person get so upset that I just told him good news and that bird falls down dead? With a heavy heart, he comes back and he breaks the news to the bird in the cage. I announced it as I told you, whatever you told me. And the moment I told them that about your message, a bird fell down dead. Listening to this, the bird on the cage falls down dead. The man is shocked. He opens the cage door, very gently takes the bird out, and immediately the bird flies and sits on a high ledge. The man was so upset. He says, see, I took such good care of you. I love you. Why do you do this for me? Sitting on the top at a high perch, the bird said, my friend from Africa sent me a message. And so the person said, what is it? He said, if you want true freedom, you must die before you die. If you want true freedom, if you want Parama Purushartha, the ego in you must die. Only then you will be able to discover your higher nature. That is what is meant by Kasya Kamaya. The Bhokta in us has to be negated. We now look to the final part. Once there is no desire, there is no desirer, there can be no suffering. But still I see so much suffering. Dr. Devakar, please.
Thank you, sir. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Let's look at the brief analysis of the last segment, which is Shariram Anusvanjare, which is covered from the verses 223 till 250. Next slide, sir. Jvara literally means fever, but here it means afflictions or any problems or diseases to our body. Our body, as we know already, has three layers: gross, which is Sthula Sharira, subtle, which is Sukshma Sharira, and the causal, which is Karana Sharira. Sharira is Siryamanatvat Shariram, meaning that which decays and perishes. We know that the causal body pervades the subtle and the gross body. Subtle body pervades the gross body. It is at the causal body our unmanifested tendencies, vasanas, are stored. So, which of these layers has Jvara? It is at each of them, and it is the cause for our sufferings. Just bodily sufferings are enough to give us a lot of misery, and it is a true torture when coupled with the mental pain. The physical body Jvara or conditions are called as Vyadhi. That of mental are called as Adi, and causal body afflictions are Upadhi. When all come together, it is a hell for the individual. We all know what kind of diseases our physical body goes through. All sorts of deformities, all medical conditions, accident-related injuries, etc. According to Ayurveda, the imbalance in Vata, which is the air element, Pitta, the bile or the fire element, and Kapha, the phlegm or the water element, causes various physical ailments. Of course, we know the illnesses of the mind, be it depression, anxiety, stress, psychosis, etc. And the problematic thoughts which arise from the internal enemies, Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. Problems of the subtle body are also related to respiration, circulation, and we know all those problems as well. According to Shastras, the root cause for both the physical and the mental afflictions are the problems of the causal body. Causal body is the seat of ignorance, the avidya. That is where all our core vasanas are stored. Karma phalam accounts are stored in this unaccessible hard drive, which is responsible for this janma as well as for any future janmas. It is active in deep sleep, where we are blissfully sleeping, but we are ignorant of that as well. We can't even claim the happiness at that time. Like Lord Indra wrongly thought, as mentioned in the Chandogya Upanishad, we too think that our body, mind, and then the causal body is the real self. But the Brahma Vidya Acharya makes it very clear that all of them are full of afflictions and so are termed as anatma only. In the next slide, we see, can the jvara, the sufferings of the three layers of the body be stopped? This is beautifully explained by giving three examples. Just as there is no cloth without threads, no blanket without wool, and no pot without the clay, there is no body without any afflictions. The gross and the subtle bodies are made up of matter, which by nature undergo modifications and hence create problems, the afflictions. All we can do is damage control or take precautions to minimize problems. So, because of the nature of the body mind, because of the aging and the death of the body, no one can avoid the problems. Only when the body dies, its afflictions goes away completely. However, the total dissolution or elimination of the afflictions of the body mind is possible with the removal of the ignorance and the ignorance born body mind identification, which is the cause for this suffering. Only when the cause is removed, the effects disappear completely. In the next slide, we see, yes, body, mind, and the causal body have afflictions. Then what about the Chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness? Does it also have its own natural afflictions? Guru says Chidabhasa is nothing but the original consciousness which is reflected by the medium, which is the subtle body and the causal sharira, causal body. Original consciousness has no afflictions and therefore Chidabhasa too has no afflictions. In the example of the sunlight getting reflected in the bucket water, reflection quality from the water depends on the quality of the water. Here, sunlight is the original consciousness, Chit. Reflected sunlight is the Chidabhasa. The bucket is the physical body and water is the subtle body, mainly the mind. So, just as any defects in the reflected sunlight is because of the quality of the water, any problems seemingly seen on the Chidabhasa belongs to the body mind only and not to either Chidabhasa or the Chit. The next slide we see, then why does it seems like the individual or the Chidabhasa is afflicted? This is because of the ignorance of the true nature. Instead of identifying with the afflictionless Atma, it gets identified with the body mind, whose very nature is affliction ridden. Just like the reflected light identifying with the muddy water and forgetting that it is indeed nothing but the reflected sunlight. So this agnana of a wrong identification leads to adhyasa, the superimposition of body-mind onto oneself, leading to the suffering. He thinks, I am a diabetic, I am dark, I am stressed, I am ignorant, I am sad, etc. Of course, this is a false notion, as the problems of the body-mind are being seen as problems of the I, the consciousness, or Chidabhasa. This is like how we also suffer when our close family members, wife, children suffer. Instead of objectifying their problems, we subjectify them. In the next slides. So, what is the way out of these afflictions? This is possible only through nididhyasanam, constant anchoring to the afflictionless experiencer, which is Atma, and objectifying anatma, body mind, and looking at every experience from the standpoint of the Atma. A man got scared looking at his own shadow in the dark. On realizing that it is his own shadow, he is no longer bothered about what happens to the shadow. He is neither happy nor sad. Likewise, Chidabhasa, on realizing his own falsity, he ceases to think himself as someone other than the Chit. He doesn't trouble himself with the troubles of the body. He is always aware that worldly experiences are of the lower order of the reality. In other words, mithya. So worldly experiences, that is BMW, body, mind, and the world, is mithya. How does this enlightened person feel after falsifying the ego? Just as how we feel a bit ashamed. Next slide, sir. Just as how we feel a little bit ashamed on mistaking a rope as a snake, Jnani too feels ashamed and regrets of false identification with the ego previously. as if he has made a false allegation on the Chit by wrong identification, Chidabhasa. A Gnani seeks permanent refuge in Chit by constant Nididhyasanam as a Prayaschitta. Praya is compensatory act for wrongdoing, and Chitta is not repeating the same mistake again. In the next slide, we see what does such a realized Gnani do after realizing the mistake. Just as the crown prince, who is to be coronated soon, starts to follow and mimic the king, Chidabhasa too starts to align with Chit, as if the higher and lower birds of the Mundakopanishad sits beside on par with each other. This identification with Chit is only possible with Atmagnana. Knower of the Brahman becomes Brahman. Brahmavid apnoti param. So long as there is a seed, it can germinate and become a sprout and a plant and so on. But if the seed is roasted, as told by Dr. Ravi Shankar, it is although a seed which is existing, it loses its ability to germinate. Therefore, the progress into the cycle of rebirth and death is lost. A Gnani anchored in knowledge is like a roasted seed. All actions done do not impact the Gnanam, and the identity with the body mind will become a lower order of the reality. In the next slide, we see after getting this knowledge, can the ignorance return back again? Even after realizing that it is a rope, not a snake, the scary impressions of the snake can come back briefly in the dim light. But this is transient. Just like that, because of the jvara in the Karana Sharira, because of the Prabala Prarabdhas, the thought that I am a mortal body may appear occasionally. In the next slide, we see this question again. Does it mean that the knowledge is lost if the ignorance comes back again? Atma Gnanam, which is learnt through systematic approach after following Karma and Upasana Yoga, will never get destroyed by such lapses caused by the Prarabdha Karma. Liberation while living is not a vow, but it is indeed the abidance in the truth. Even they realized Shankara, Adi Shankara, too discriminated Chandala while walking in the streets of Varanasi. But very quickly he realizes this mistake and exalts Manisha Panchakam as a Prayaschitta. In the next slide, we see, okay, a Gnani realizes that afflictions are only to the Sthula, Sukshma and Karana Sharira, but not to Chidabhasa or the Chit. But for the body-mind diseases, will this Gnani take any treatment? Will he take any remedy or not? Of course, he takes care of the body and mind. And of course, he takes care for any illnesses or the diseases that the body and mind goes through. And he takes appropriate treatment. This is done without any suffering. After all, the body-mind is a very important tool we have for transactions in the Vyavahara Prapancha, and also even to learn Atmagnana. Problems of the body and mind and the causal state is called as jvara. Our identification with these problems and suffering is called as anujvara. Even a Gnananishta can't escape jvara. Example, Ramana Maharshi and Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, they had painful cancers, but absolutely no suffering, no anujvara at all. This is the difference between Agnani and Agnani. Agnani with subjectification of body-mind will suffer from even the minor ailments, whereas Gnani will deal with even the life-threatening conditions like cancer with total objectification of body-mind while anchoring to the subject Satchidananda Atma. By this, Shoka Nivrutti is achieved with lot of ease. What remains is pure bliss, pure Ananda, born out of Purnatvam. This is the Tripti. Thank you, sir. Hari Om.
Thank you very much, Dr. Devakar. That was an excellent analysis of these set of verses called Sharirat Anusanjvaret. That means struggle stops. Although the body will have problems, the mind will have problems, the Karana Sharira will have its problems, but when there is Atmanam Ched Vijaniyat, we have to learn to identify with the Atma and see this as an instrument which is little defective. And because of the defective instrument, I'm not able to communicate properly, but it is a problem related to the body. It is anatma. I do not identify or claim it is me. And with that, shoka nivritti. And finally, we come to the song of a person who's fully blessed. How does a person express himself? How does such a person live a life? It will be Dr. Anupama. Please take your time, because today we will go about 10 or 15 minutes beyond time. But Dr. Anupama, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A summary of verses 250 to 298. In these verses, we discover a hidden phalam. The Brihadaranyaka mantra 4412 does describe bhogya nivritti, bhoktru nivritti, anujvara or shoka nivritti. But we now discover that with shoka nivritti, effortlessly, simultaneously, and spontaneously, one experiences Brahmananda or Jivan Mukti. This is Tripti Prapti, or the seventh, the Saptami Avastha. How does Jnanam cause this shift from Shoka Nivritti to Tripti Prapti? With this Jnanam, my mindset gets revamped. I now know that I am of the nature of Nitya Mukta Atma. I am the only source of happiness. By my presence, I enliven my body through which I experience the world. The world and body do not affect me, and by forgetting my real nature, I suffer samsara. How is this Brahmananda different from Vishayananda? By fulfilling worldly goals, we get Sa-ankusha Tripti, which is finite, temporary, fluctuating, a conditional Tripti that belongs to the Apurna Ahankara. Sakshi's Purnatva gives Nirankusha Tripti, which is unconditional, resulting in a shift from the triangular to the binary format, from Yoga Buddhi to Sankhya Buddhi. I experience 4 significant changes. I now know that I am Nitya Mukta Atma and not Ahankara. I have no sadhana, secular or sacred, for moksha. My every activity is Loka Kshema Sadhana and not Moksha Sadhana. Moksha is not a sadhya, but my nature. My devotion is expressed as reverence to Vishwarupa Ishvara. Does this jnani need to do Shravana Manana Nitityasanam? No, this is only for ajnanis. Moksha Sadhya Siddhyartham. Being a Nitya Mukta, there is no need for Shravana. He has already got his jnanam. There is no need for Mananam because he has no doubts, and no need for Nitityasanam because Viparita Bhavana does not affect him. Now the Purva Pakshi takes over with a series of doubts. The Purva Pakshi says, if a jnani needs no sadhanas, why does he need bhiksha, sleep, sharira yatra karmas and so on? Swamiji says, Gunja punjadi dahyatena anya aropita vahnina. This describes the akartritva state of a jnani. A red seed with a black dot appears like a heap of embers of fire. They don't have agnitva, but the Agni status is superimposed on this Gunja. Swamiji asks, can this superimposed Agnitva give the Gunja the capacity to burn anything? Similarly, superimposed status has no consequence, no samsara, kartritva, etc. If the world thinks that the jnani is a karta, so what? He has no sanchita agami prarabdha karmas. The Purva Pakshi then says, if a jnani has no dehabhimana, how will he manage vyavaharika transactions? Something like the way Arjuna asked, Sthita Prajnasya ka bhasa. Swamiji says, don't confuse samanya adhyasa with vishesha adhyasa. Adhyasa is of 2 types. Samanya adhyasa is habitual. It's a prarabdha vasana. It does not require deliberate intellectual conclusion. Every animal has samanya adhyasa. It is deha adhyasa and does not cause samsara. Vishesha adhyasa is anujvara. It is deliberate. It is a self-awareness, a self-judgment. It is the cause of samsara. Vedanta removes Vishesha Adhyasa and not Samanya, which is the result of Prarabdha. With or without Jnanam, One needs to eat when he feels hungry. Biological pain is samanya adhyasa, but worry is vishesha adhyasa. The Purvapakshi goes on to say, any vyavahara requires an active mind. So meditation is mandatory to reduce vyavahara. Swamiji says, for a jivan mukta, everything vyavaharika is just a series of nitya events happening to a mithya sharira. What difference does it make to me, the Satya Atma, Vishwam Dharpana Drishyamana Nagari Tulyam? I remain asanga. Indriyani Indriya Artheshu Vartante, Guna Guneshu Vartante. The Jivan Mukti goes on to proclaim, I, the Nitya Mukta Atma, have no vikshepa. Samadhi is just a remedy for vikshepa. My thoughts are a modification of the mind, a vikara based on will, world, and vasanas, over which I have little or no control. As it is impossible to have a perfect mind, it is better to disidentify from it. The Purvapakshi goes on to suggest Samadhi Yasa is necessary for direct experience of Atma. He replies, Atma Anubhava is Nityam. It is a Samanya Anubhava available freely to everyone universally in all avasthas. The Jnani says, I have nothing more to do or achieve. Kritam, Krityam, Prapaniyam, Praptam, iti eva nischaya. Can this Jnani become a karmi at any time? Never. The Jnani has rejected anatma. Success and failures of ahankara, he knows, are mithya. He has mithyatva drishti of jagat. He is a samsari. He has no sadhana, no karma. On the contrary, can ahankara be liberated by any sadhana? With imperfections at emotional, physical, and intellectual levels, ahankara will never be liberated. Therefore, a karmi who identifies with ahankara can never be liberated. Next, what is the lifestyle of a jnani? Will it be pravritti or nivritti? Whatever the lifestyle of a jnani, he continues to remain in the binary format. Externally, his karmas, be it kaika, vachika, or manasa, may look similar to that of a karmi or even a karma yogi. The difference is only in the bhavana. The karma yogi's bhavana is mumukshutva buddhi, moksha sadhanatva bhavana, mokshe sadhya bhavana. Whereas for a jnani, it is muktatva bhavana, lokakshema sadhanatva bhavana, and mokshe swarupa bhavana. A jnani's swabhava governs his lifestyle. The Purvapakshi then insists a jnani should follow nivritti and not involve in any vyavaharika activities. Swamiji says the pravritti marga, like Panchamaha Yajnas, are for obtaining jnana yogyata, which is required by a karma yogi. The nivritti marga is for jnanam, which a mumukshu needs. A jnani certainly needs neither of them. The Purvapakshi then says, nivritti is needed even after jnanam because avidya vasanas can destroy this jnanam. He implies that everyone should ultimately become a sannyasi because even though jnanam destroys avidya, its various karyas, the avidya vasanas, remain to cause samsara. Swami says, along with vidya, also a person acquires vidya vasanas. And these vidya vasanas, which are associated with jnanam, are certainly stronger and they will negate the avidya vasanas. The Purvapakshi then goes on to say, will not the experience of anatma threaten jnanam? So, should we wait for videha mukti or live like a recluse to avoid anatma experience? Swamiji says, any mithya anubhava can never be a threat to jnanam, which is centered on satyam. If jnanam can falsify the experienced world, how can this mithya world threaten jnanam? For example, does my experience of the flat earth challenge my understanding that the earth is not flat? Can a dead rat kill a cat? Adhyasa sorrow can never disturb Adhishtana Ananda. Swamiji then goes on to glorify knowledge. He says knowledge is like a solitary king on a battlefield, and the enemies are avidya with all its ramifications, the adhyasas, samsara, sanchita, agami, prarabdha karmas. And one king, he says, can destroy 1,000,000 enemies. So what is the agenda of a jnani? It is loka sangraha. A jivan mukta is the father of the entire universe. Every ajnani is a spiritual baby. The jnani strives to enlighten the unenlightened. Remaining in the binary format, he sees the entire world as a drama. He is no longer a sadhaka. He has nothing to do. He's an akarta. He has nothing to accomplish. He's purna with nothing to acquire. Yasya brahmani ramate chittam nandati nandati nandatyeva. This is tripti. And this is the song of a tripta jnani. Dhanyoham nityam swatmanam anjasa vedmi. Dhanyoham brahmanando vibhati me spashtam. I am fortunate to possess this wealth of knowledge. Brahmananda is my swarupa. Vidyaranya Swami concludes by celebrating his gratitude to Shastras and Gurus who have catapulted him to the binary format. Aho Shastram, Aho Shastram, Aho Guru, Aho Guru, Aho Jnanam, Aho Jnanam, Aho Sukham, Aho Sukham. The result being Nitya Purna Sukha or Tripti. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anupama. That was another very brilliant conclusion of the last part on Tripti. As Atma, I have 0 complaints and therefore I live in Ananda. This is Tripti. A person has moved from direct knowledge, Aparoksha Jnanam. We have seen Shoka Nivritti and attained Tripti thanks to the Guru and the Shastras. What do? From now on, Tat Chintanam, Tat Katanam, Anyon Tat Prabodhanam. Let this be something that we meditate on all the time. From now on, we can understand what Swami Anubhavananda says. Life is a time pass. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. And then what do? Wherever you are, whenever you are, whatever you are, can be 100%. Live at a level of 0 complaint level and be happy. Friends, we have come to the end of this very beautiful Tripti Deepa Panchadashi chapter 7. It has been a great experience to do that. I will leave with this beautiful story of how we can live our lives as a wise person or as an otherwise person or an ignorant person. All of us, whoever we may be, our life is a struggle depending upon our prarabdha. Each one at his own level has his own share of sorrows and problems in our life. But can we walk through our life like a one who knows that this is my last life? I have come to the end of my journey because now I have understood very clearly I am not this body, naham beham. This is very clear to me. For such a person who has disidentified from the body, who has worked on his ahankara, knows one thing, that this identification is the only thing that is required. My prarabdha will make me experience difficulties in my body. My prarabdha will see that I have anxieties in my mind. My mind will be the monkey that it has always been. But now I know that like that traveler going through the struggle, I will go through it. But how will I go? But I will go like a person, that jnana, who is so full of enthusiasm. And because of this enthusiasm, the person is able to complete the journey. Venkatesh Prasad, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hegde sir, Dr. Anupama. Dr. Ravi Shankar and Dr. Divakar for a wonderful summary class. We extend our deep gratitude to all of US for staying with us not only through these summary classes, but the entire study of Tripti Deepa. That brings us to the end of this session, and with it, our study of Tripti Deepa. Please look forward to our Kathopanishad and gift classes. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Hari Om. Thank you.